it started shooting flames out instead of smoke. So a few years ago, I had bought a just mostly abandoned DeLorean, and my dad and I had restored it and everything. But within the sort of DeLorean community, you have people that love Back to the Future, and there's people that just love the DeLorean. And I kind of found myself sort of in the middle of that. I thought it would be cool to try to design a modular time machine kit. This would be a kit that would basically just stick on the car for low-speed driving, just parades, static displays, and that kind of stuff. Georgia Tech has a thing called the Ramblin' Wreck Parade, and it's a parade where students show off some of their interesting cars. There's a section for classic cars, and there's a section for all these contraptions, and there's one called Fixed Display, I believe. And so these are cars that just have interesting things kind of put on them. Most oftentimes it's like an old Chevy Cobalt with like, a sailboat on it or something, but I thought it'd be cool to try to turn the DeLorean into a screen-accurate time machine with relatively affordable materials. I actually work at a place called the Georgia Tech Invention Studio. It's one of the largest student-run maker spaces. So I decided to use this space to try to create all the time machine parts. So we used everything from CNC machines, laser cutters, 3D printers, and designed everything in CAD with all the engineering stuff that myself and my friends had learned, and make all these parts for the car. It turned out amazing. It's almost like you're in the movie when you see this car sitting there with the blue lights going and the vents sticking up, plutonium chamber glowing. It's way cool. It's one of the coolest things I've ever done. It's so neat. So we had actually worked on this car for months and months and months, taking all kinds of measurements and put the car together. And we'd actually fully assembled the car the first time the night before the parade, which this parade was at 8 a.m. This was about 11 o'clock or close to midnight when we were putting this car together. And one of the things that we wanted to do with this car was have it shoot smoke out the back like it did the beginning of Back to the Future. Because the way the parade works, you actually drive up onto Fowler Street and take a right onto First Street, which is the main loop around campus. And so when you take the right, you kind of sit there at a 45 and the MC talks about the car and everything and introduces the car, the organization that it represents. I thought it'd be cool to just hit a button and just go psh and shoot smoke out the back. So I had actually bought some smoke bombs about this big. And we decided that we were going to try to rig them up inside the rear vents of the time machine and be able to rig it up and have them shoot the smoke out the back. And so we had done a few tests outside the car, and tonight we were going to put one in there and see what it actually looked like. And so we placed the smoke bomb in, we wired it up with a little igniter, and we pressed the button, and it started shooting flames out instead of smoke. And I start panicking, going, "Oh no!" Like all the parts in the back were actually made out of plywood. It wasn't aluminum like the actual movie car. And so like every good collector car, I have a fire extinguisher. So I run to the car, grab the fire extinguisher, try to put it out. It ends up not putting it out. It ends up knocking this smoke bomb turned rocket engine into the engine bay of the car. And so I start freaking out, going, "Oh no, this car is going to burn to the ground. It's going to explode. Like a bunch of people are going to get hurt." I realized that the way the time machine parts bolted on the back, it was a really big design flaw. You can't open the rear of the car to access the engine because it kind of like loops under the bumper a little bit. So I ended up going Hulk smashing the stuff, ripping the stuff off in order to get into the engine bay and get this smoke bomb turned rocket motor out of the car. Turns out it didn't really burn anything, but because it was creating smoke and fire, I just see glowing red coming out of the back of the car. I'm like, "Oh, this thing's on fire. It's gonna burn to the ground. It's this bad." But once the smoke clears, we realized that time machine parts are all over the ground. We had been working on this thing for months, and the car is covered in like fire extinguisher residue all over it. And it's just this mess. And the parade is at 8 that morning. I was really frazzled by this. I was like, "Oh man, like we messed up the car, but I saved the car," and I was just really conflicted. And so my friends, we actually all got together and we started to build teams together to sort of delegate the work of putting this car back together. So a team got together and we started remaking the time machine parts in the machine shop. We actually drove the car to the machine shop. And then another team was going to clean the car inside and out. This stuff was everywhere. It was in the interior. It was ridiculous. We ended up working on this car for hours, putting it back together. We were like taping things together, just kind of bodging it together to make it work. And we had finished working on the car and we were going to drive it back to the parking lot where we were going to store it that night for the parade in the morning. And this was probably at about 2 a.m. We had just put this car back together. It looked like nothing had ever happened. And so right as we're pulling in to the parking lot, the car dies in classic DeLorean fashion, dying at the exact wrong time, just like in the movie. And so we realized after troubleshooting that the battery had died. And we're like, "Oh, well, the alternator went bad." And so we looked down the pulley and it's covered in that fire extinguisher mess, and it was causing the belts not to grab onto the pulley. And so we're like, well, how do we clean this? And so we ended up jumping off the car. I held some really high revs, and my friend went in with a paper towel and was dragging it along the belt, risking losing his fingers and all these crazy pulleys going around trying to clean off this belt. And miraculously, it worked. The car was fine after that. But the voltage was still a little bit wobbly, and I wasn't really confident that it was going to be all right during the parade, because the parade is just sustained very slow driving for about an hour, just kind of just going real slow. So I thought, I need to make sure this car is going to be fine, because I don't want to be pushing this, because there's crowds of 1,000 people or more watching this. I got about 2 hours of sleep that night. I had actually decided to dress up like Doc Brown, and my friend Joe dressed up like Marty McFly. I wanted to be able to monitor this voltage better than the actual stock gauge in the car, because it doesn't give really accurate voltage readouts. So I hooked jumper cables to the battery, which is behind the passenger seat, a little compartment, a lot like a C3 Corvette, and ran this jumper cable along the side of the seat. But then I was left with about maybe 5 or 6 feet left over of this cable, and so I actually bound it all up and wrapped it up in a towel and hooked these jumper cables to leads on a multimeter and insulate everything with this towel. So there's this precarious wad of wires and things in the floorboard. And so Joe gets in the car ready for the parade, and he goes, "Is this gonna blow up my feet?" And I said, "Don't worry about it, just watch the multimeter." So we had a great time. We got staged up for the parade and watching that voltmeter, and it was reading a solid 14 volts. It was awesome. It was solid the whole way. We were having a great time. Like Joe and I were like high-fiving every 5 minutes going, "Yeah, it's got voltage." So that was definitely a good time. So after I had done the time machine conversion, I started getting all kinds of phone calls and emails from people that I didn't know that found out that I had a DeLorean time machine, because turns out now I had the only DeLorean time machine in Georgia. One of the more ridiculous stories when it comes to DeLorean rentals is one that happened last year, actually on the week of Back to the Future Day, October 21st. So the Atlanta Marriott Hotel in downtown Atlanta, it's this beautiful hotel. It's amazing. It looks like a skeleton on the inside. It's amazing. We had actually got a request to bring this car down for this science convention and have it displayed in the first floor lobby area of the hotel for guests to see and take pictures with and everything. And they ended up throwing a crazy number at me. And so I was like, heck yeah, I'll bring it. Before we went down there, we realized that the hotel doesn't have a ramp to drive a car into the hotel, because how often do you drive a car into a hotel? They only have a loading dock at dock height. So we ended up having to call a record driver just to use it as a ramp, to drive the car up onto the ramp. And this was very precarious, because DeLoreans are very low cars. And so I'm driving it up this really steep ramp, and the car just scraping its way up, and I'm like, oh man, this is terrible, making all these horrible noises. And we get it up onto the ramp, and we back it into the loading dock area, which the loading dock area is just barely wide enough to get a big rig in there, because of course in downtown Atlanta, every square inch of your building counts. And I'm having to drive it down this windy corridor with all these cabinets on the side of it and everything. It was just already ridiculous when we had just gotten there. And we ended up having to drive the car into a freight elevator. And the elevator was the walls are so close that I was in the car, I couldn't get out of the car. Even with the gull-wing doors, they don't need a whole lot of space on the side, but I still couldn't get out of the car. I pull into this freight elevator, and there's the guys that are operating the elevator, and this elevator is super old. It's this hotel, I think, was built in the 60s or 70s, and this elevator had not been updated since then. And it was just rickety and everything, and they're sitting there kind of forcing the door closed and everything, and pressing all these buttons and pulling on wires, and I'm going, I don't know if I feel comfortable with this. And then the elevator starts going up, and I'm like, okay. The door opens up, and we push the car outside, and the car was on display. We actually, I have it set up where you can plug it into a wall outlet and have the lights set up, and the car was on display there for about 3 or 4 days, and everything was fine during the display and everything. I didn't get any calls of, your car caught on fire or it's leaking oil or something stupid. And so we come back to come get the car. We had actually made arrangements with the tow truck driver, helped us get the car in to help us get the car back out. We were supposed to have the car out by, I think it was 9 p.m. was when like the hotel management kind of, that would help facilitate that kind of stuff, they go home. So we had to have the car out by then. So I think we had arranged for about 7 o'clock. The guy was supposed to be there. So, we get there at about 6 o'clock to help get the car ready and get things out of the way so we can put it back into this ridiculous elevator. I would say about 8:30 rolls around, and we haven't heard anything from this guy. And so I'm sitting there trying to call him, trying to text him, like, we need to get this car out of here because the hotel management's breathing down our neck to get this car out of here. He sends me a picture of his engine taken apart with coolant and oil everywhere. He's like, sorry man, my engine blew up, I can't come get you. And I'm sitting here going, oh man, we're stuck in this hotel with a DeLorean and we can't get it out. So my dad and I, we start frantically placing phone calls to all of the tow truck companies around, and they're like, you need what? And it ends up taking another 3 hours to get a tow truck there. And of course the hotel management was you know, a couple of people had to stay late, which the people that stayed late, they were great people, but the people in charge were not happy with having to pay their people a little bit extra to help us get this car out of here. We eventually get the tow truck driver there and a nice, really shiny, brand new tow truck that wasn't kind of rickety. And I'm getting the car out, took it back home, and we didn't get settled in to get the car in the garage till about like 2 a.m. It was terrible. But we had gotten a good paycheck, so it was worth it, but that was one of the more ridiculous ones. What's really cool is my car is actually registered with a service called Rent DeLorean. And so you go in, you type in your zip code, and you can actually be connected with DeLorean owners that are nearby to you that are willing to rent your car out for events. So I like to say just as easily as you can order a pizza, you can have a DeLorean show up at your house.
We'd like to thank Vincero Watches for supporting VINwiki this month. Vincero makes bold, stylish, and well-priced watches out of exceptional materials, and there's a link in the description below for a discount. So check out their website and find the watch that helps make the statement that you want the world to see.